That's one of the core, I would say, the good traits of being an appreciative practitioner, to be comfortable with not knowing, because we have to really genuinely not know the answer that someone might give us in order to be genuinely curious.
Welcome to the Thrive with Kate Stillman podcast, made for you by us.
Hello, everyone. It's Kate with the Thrive with Kate podcast, and I'm here with Suzanne Quinney of appreciatingpeople.co.uk. And Suzanne, with her husband, Tim Slack, they founded Appreciating People. And today we're going to get into appreciative interviews, which is the process that they use that helps people really get into appreciating their lives. And I'm so excited to find out more about your journey, Suzanne. I know you've published a lot. You've so many great resources. You've got so many great downloads on your site and case studies and a shop full of books. Let's just start with how did you two found Appreciating People? What was that all about?
Well, I discovered Appreciative Inquiry, I think in about 2004, something like that. And something about it just drew me. The fact that it focuses on strengths and what's working, not problems. And I think partly that might be because, in my earlier careers, I'd worked in overseas development and I'd worked in community development in this country. And I'd never really found a way to do that work well in my eyes, where people were genuinely treated as equals. And when I sort of understood what appreciative inquiry was and how it's totally based on the fact that everybody has wisdom in them.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to access and use and draw on and share and expand and extend. So it just felt like, yes, I want to do more of this. So, and then I introduced my husband to it and he really liked it. And then we just decided that we'd set up the company. Tim went first, he went freelance, and I was still working for a housing association. And then a couple of years later, I took the leap as well and joined. And then because mostly our backgrounds are in the public sector, third sector, working with charities and community groups, that's where our focus has been really with our work. Although originally Appreciative Inquiry, I think it began in the field of organizational development. So it was mostly used with businesses, private companies in its early days. Although, it also got taken up by USAID and churches in America. The person who was responsible for developing it, he was David Cooper Ryder. He's always been very generous, and made all his material open source. So it's always encouraging people to take it and make it their own.
I ran into it with Liberating Structures, which is like liberatingstructures.com. For those who don't know, they have a lot of different structures. And so one of their structures is appreciative interviews. And for the last 5 years, at every members event I have led, we've used appreciative interviews. We choose a handful of structures every time. That one always makes the cut. So I know people are dying to find out, well, what is it? What is appreciative interview? So let's hear it from the pro.
Well, at the heart of it is you're asking a set of questions. It can be a fairly standard template, but you're asking people to, first of all, like a warm-up, to share a story about something that's gone well or something they're proud of. And then you're going to ask them about their strengths and what they value. And then you're going to ask them, you'll have chosen a topic for your conversation. So, for example, often when I work in health organizations, the topic might be safety. So then the questions would be, tell me where you've seen really good safety practices, for example. Or tell me about something that you've seen that really helped safety be stronger. So you're asking people to dig back into their experience, or not even that far back, it could be very current, but to bring in those good experiences. And a number of different things happen when we have these conversations with another person. It sort of releases some creativity, the whole sort of feel good element, that we're looking at things that have gone well, that gets more dopamine in our system. We're more reflective. We're more ready to learn from the other person as well and their stories.
So our receptivity shifts.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just thinking about how I came into a lot of this work with, helping people be more successful in life. And for me, it really came from enlightenment work. And how do we help humans be more enlightened? And in that work, I ran into Craig Hamilton and a lot of the work from Integral Institute and some of the breakoffs from Integral, and the concept of like we space. Like there's a space that's formed when we're together, and the more conscious and intentional we are to the space that we're creating together, the more seems to happen in that space.
Yes, yes.
And so what I'm hearing and what you're saying is that simply the structure, and I'm even thinking right now of like this is such a simple structure. A parent can do it with a child. A grown child can do it with an elderly parent. Like a friend can do it with another friend when they're walking around the neighborhood. It is such an easy structure to learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's growing this connectivity in the we space that's making us healthier, like literally like just healthier, having a conversation, right? Where it's actually shifting our microbiome. It's shifting our neurotransmitters. It's anti-aging. It's an anti-aging conversation, Suzanne.
Beautifully said. I really like that idea. So then the question would be, tell me about a time when you actually felt younger than the day before or the year before. You see, you get your topic and then you put your questions around it. The tricky thing, well, not tricky, but people, because we're so habituated to talking about problems and things that haven't gone well.
Yeah, complaining, right?
Yeah. So our mind, so when we first begin this, we have to, really pay attention that we haven't slid back into that. And of course, another part of this work, a core skill, is reframing. So you're regularly noticing, where's the problem focus coming up in me, and how am I going to reframe that into something to talk about something I want more of, or something that's gone well.
Let's use an example for that.
Reframing. Well, I like doing a lot with language. So there's words per se. In fact, we've got a really fantastic colleague in the Appreciative Inquiry world called Dr. Claudia Gross, and she's recently brought out a book called Speak Green. So she's made her one of her life's jobs has been to look at all the words, which so many of our words come from military use or from organizational structure, and we
execute.
Don't really, execute. And I met a lovely woman recently who's reframed language around photography, and she comments on the fact, exactly, yeah. So it becomes so interesting when we look at these words and look at what we want to do instead.
Yeah.
So if a problem might be, oh, I don't know, I'm far too busy at Christmas, I haven't got any time.
Yeah.
So then a reframe of that would be, I've got some really lovely things that I enjoy doing. How am I going to make time for the things that might slip off my list?
Yes. I do this one, like last night I walked in we have a lovely hot tub, cold plunge. Actually, I rolled around in the snow and I came in and my thought was, oh my gosh, there's so much to do. Like I'm rebuilding a lot of structures in my company so that we go into 2025 with an updated structure. And like, so much to do. And I was just like, reframe. And my go-to reframe that I have like programmed my mind into. So I can't stop the overwhelm yet. You know what I mean? Like it's deep. It's deep, but I can catch it right away. So my go-to reframe is, how easy can it be?
Nice.
So
I like that. Lovely.
Right. It recognizes the problem. So it's not in denial that there's a lot to do.
Mm-hmm.
But in the how easy can it be, And let's talk about this. Let's talk about, what does a question do to the mind?
Yes. It provokes wonder, doesn't it? And it provokes a moment of not knowing. And again, that's one of the core, I would say, the good traits of being an appreciative practitioner, to be comfortable with not knowing, because we have to really genuinely not know the answer that someone might give us in order to be genuinely curious. So we have to abandon all that inner stuff that has got the answer already prepared and sit there not knowing. But the power of not knowing is quite profound, I think. So it's like, how easy can it be? I wonder.
It's like Rumi said, sell your wisdom and purchase bewilderment.
Really? Okay. But
Something
that
like
would be
that. It's something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I've always loved that world, that like different type of word of curiosity, of like just being in amazement of the person. Because I feel like in appreciative interviews, it opens the we space, the space between us, to a level where there's such a, I mean, in the yogic terminology, we would say Shakti, that like the space gets charged with a rich energy, where we are so curious about the person that there's like a level, like you said it before, that this positivity creates an awe of what someone else has lived through or experienced or accomplished, or how they've navigated something. And I love how you brought in that it's not hierarchical, because you're coming from more from working within agencies and organizations where there's naturally a hierarchical structure, and how this structure of appreciative interviews deconstructs that and sparks that curiosity or that bewilderment.
Yes, and that's why the preparation of a set of questions for a conversation can sometimes take a little while. Also, why we always test it beforehand with a couple of people from the room that's going to be present, because everybody has to be able to answer the questions, regardless of length of service or position in any hierarchy that there might be. And then that means, in order also for that to really work, we need to have prepared the room, the warm-ups activities. There's a lovely example, actually, which comes from the work that Bliss Brown did in Imagine Chicago, which formed the foundation of a whole load of Imagine movements. Cities and countries across the world did this Imagine work. But she talks about in Chicago, she brought in a group of children to have conversations with a group of senior managers from the city. And the children that she chose, young people, they were all musicians. So the first thing she did was they performed. So they had already established something about themselves. And then they all had these paired conversations with these executives.
That's so cool. Yeah. So there's already connection. And that kind of goes back to the Shakti and the we space. Like there's already a field of energy built for then the questions to be, the container, right? Is built. And then the questions happen with the container.
And the reference to strengths. Because, sometimes before I'm doing training, I might send people a strength finder, because a lot of people haven't necessarily thought, perhaps this is more true in Europe than in the States, but people aren't used to thinking they can talk about their strengths. And sometimes they might not even be able to easily pull one up.
Because it's like tall poppy syndrome. It's like that, like don't stand out. Yeah, you're right. Americans don't have that as much. Like we're so highly individualistic that we've been probably a little bit more conditioned into our strengths, but maybe not how our strengths fit together with other people. We're probably not aware of that as people maybe in Australia or Europe.
Right. So then a lovely question would be, tell me about a time when drawing on one of your strengths, you really helped someone else bring theirs to bear.
Oh my gosh. Totally. I've been doing that all week. I love it. So tell us a bit about, so you guys have a new book, Food for Thought, and
No,
in it,
our newest book is Appreciating Health and Care.
oh, appreciating health and care. Okay, but I have a question about on your website in some of your free resources. From Food for Thought, you have appreciative journaling.
Yes.
So tell people, what is appreciative journaling? Like how can they start doing something? Because I know my listeners and they're like, tell me what to do. Tell me how to do it.
Okay. Okay, right. Well, again, appreciative journaling. I don't know if you were like this, but when I was young, I used to journal, and all I did was write about everything that was making me unhappy. I felt that was,
Yeah.
I had to get it out on
Complaining.
paper.
It's like a complain
Remember that,
journal.
those angst years. And now I look back and I think, my goodness, I never barely wrote. I might have sometimes talked about something being wonderful, but on the whole, it was how do I get the angst out? But whereas this is a very structured approach to appreciating the good things, what things have I done well today? What things did I notice someone else doing well? How did I respond in a great way to something that occurred or to someone that I met unexpectedly? And what strength did I use of mine today?
Mm.
So in Food for Thought, we give a little set of questions to start people off if you need them. But mostly, we've refined it, I think, now to being more simple. So the most recent appreciative journal we did, it's called 3 Good Things. So each day, write down 3 good things that you've done or seen or been part of or witnessed.
Mm.
And then 7 days of gratitude, 7 acts of gratitude. So there's this cultivating, it's about cultivating this appreciative muscle.
Yeah,
And then
it's a muscle.
it is an appreciation. It feeds us, it feeds the environment. It's I think it's very close, really, to a spiritual practice, if we were to take it to its furthest extent.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have no doubt in that.
Mm.
I I'm thinking of do you know about gain journaling from this is something we use all the time in Club Thrive. And I got it from Strategic Coach, from Dan Sullivan of Strategic Coach, who wrote a book called The Gap in the Gain. And that's very much like problem aware versus appreciation aware.
Nice.
And so his thesis is that if you measure your progress from where you are to the ideal, you're stuck in the gap, you're stuck in the problem.
Right.
So from where you are to your goal or the ideal, you're stuck in the problem. If you measure your progress from where you started to where you are, you capture your gain, and then you can leverage your lessons learned. You can leverage the skills and relationships and tools that you've developed along the way. And the more you articulate that, right, through journaling, through written word, the more aware you are of what are your assets. What do you have in your back pocket that can help you engage the challenge that lies ahead?
Yeah, that's lovely. And I think that in tough times, when we've developed that appreciative muscle, it can just surface when we need it.
Yeah.
I've had several people talk to me about that unexpectedly, they were dealing with something difficult, and yet they could suddenly appreciate a moment of beauty somewhere. And
Does a
that
story
lifted
come to
them.
mind?
Well, I was just thinking then about a woman who told me about how she'd spent quite a bit of time journaling, and then she was in a difficult situation. I think her mother was quite ill, and so she was really quite worried, quite preoccupied with it all. And she was outside hanging the washing, and she just suddenly saw this beautiful lavender bush and the insects. And the appreciation of that just shifted her space.
So I was once on a train. It was crossing China. I was like 20 years old. And I was on a train. It was like a 2 or 3 day train ride. It was long. It was long. I want to say it was 72 hours. And there was no place to sit for the first at least 12 hours. You're just like standing room only. So in any travel circumstance I find myself, whether there's a delay, whether there's traffic, whether the seats are small and crowded. I always just think back to like, it's never that bad. Like I've done that reframe like so deeply to be able to appreciate like, well, at least I have a seat right now. And it makes a huge difference in what happens next.
Yes, yes. And it can shift us from that judgmental place. You know, I've had times in my life where I felt, God, that was a terrible mistake I made. And I might spend a day beating myself up. And I've really seen the negative effects of that internally. So again, that motivated me very strongly to think, yeah, I need to step out of that tendency. So there's a good alternative is to appreciate ourselves.
I love that. And so you use the trigger. So I've also studied a lot of like habit, like how habits are formed, including mental habits. And there's 5 triggers: a person, a place, an action, an emotion, a preceding action, an emotion. And what I'm guessing is that this is using an emotion, right? So like the trigger of like an emotion of beating ourselves up, we use that as a trigger. And then you're saying insert the new habit of appreciate something about yourself.
Yes. Or if you can't appreciate yourself in that moment, find something that you can externally even. You know, it's sometimes it's just small steps.
Yeah, because let's break that down a little bit, because I can think of some of my members who have a really hard time. They can be so self-depreciating that to shift from beating themselves up with their internal voice, their internal dialogue, going into appreciative inquiry with themselves, it's too big a jump. So walk us through a bit of that, of how would you coach someone?
Well, I think the first thing is to get the awareness of what it is we're doing internally, you know, rather than just get drawn into it. It's about noticing what's happening. And then it's about, I often use the word inhibition. We first of all have to inhibit the automatic response. And then that makes the space where we can think, so what else can I think or do instead here?
Yeah.
So that, I mean, for me, you know, that's been a journey of many years. I've just said it in a few sentences.
Yeah, talk us through it a little bit more. Tell us more about your journey with that and what some of those, thoughts were, and how you now navigate, challenging situations where you might feel like lower self-confidence or where you get triggered.
Well, I was thinking more then. So when I was working in overseas aid, you know, that was an incredibly problem focused arena. We were there to identify problems and then to work out how to fix them, and it usually meant bringing in an external expert. So now I'm on the appreciative inquiry journey, and it's a very different approach, which I love. And yet that tendency that's so ingrained in me, I can still see the things that come up in me about pointing out problems, but I don't verbalize it anymore. And I don't give it much space, but I can still see it coming up. You know, for decades, it was how I proved my worth by identifying, oh, there's a problem with that. Or if you try and fix that, it won't work. So, you know, there's a whole rewiring almost that I think.
Oh, it's so deep. So I'm just thinking, like, say, like, for example, if I'm guiding my team and we're at a meeting and I'm seeing things aren't really working, like a process isn't working the way it should be, right? That's very problem aware. So I'm not in appreciative thinking. So help me navigate this.
Well, we often use the imagine question, you know, so it could be as simple as, imagine it's the end of our time together in this meeting. We all feel really satisfied with what's happened. How does it feel? You know, talk about what might have happened with that as your end scenario.
And I just propose that to the team and then let them respond.
Yeah, or in this situation, imagine we've really worked out a great way through this. We're congratulating ourselves on having done that. What did we do to get there?
What did we do to get there? That is so, I love that, Suzanne. It's like so simple. It's so positive. It's so not what I have to practice that wording, right? It's this like fake it until you become it. Like just practice it until it's in your back pocket.
Exactly, in your back pocket. I love that phrase. You need to have lots of these appreciative questions in your back pocket.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Do you guys have, I know you have so many resources on your site. Do you have one that's for team leaders or business owners or people leading other
Well,
people?
I don't have I can't think to bring to mind a conversation, but what I was going to mention to you was one of the tools. There's only three tools in appreciative inquiry. One is the appreciative conversation or the interview, and then one is something called S.O.A.R, which is S.O.A.R. It's the strength-based version of a SWOT.
Oh.
So you've got strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results or resources. And there's a few examples of that on our site. But I mean, that particular model was developed by Jackie Stavros and others. And initially it was for strategic planning, but we use it in so many settings now, including you can do a personal S.O.A.R. So it's a really nice way for people to sit down and map, okay, these are my strengths, these are my opportunities. Oh, look what you found. Yeah, this fantastic, this wonderful woman that was on a training course with me, and we talked about S.O.A.R, and she went home that evening and she did this one and she sent it to me. She did it with her amazing artistic skills. That was Kathy Walsh.
Oh my gosh, I want to do this with my team on Friday at our meeting. This is great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it really just points out we're rewiring. Like this is appreciative is just so it's like increasing our neuroplasticity, right? Getting us out of problem aware and then into, okay, so we've got our strengths, our opportunities, our aspirations, and our results and resources. So I will include the link.
Oh, look, just get the bird one up. The bird one's so lovely next to it. Go back. Because she did that. That one's for teams, the rocket taking off, and then the bird is for she did
for
that one as well, the
individuals.
same woman. Yeah, that's for more like a personal coaching, personal reflection journey.
Oh, how fun. Oh, this is great. This is great. So I'll include the link and then the images, you guys, and so that you can log in and be in contact with appreciating people.co.uk and then can get access into these resources. That's great. And I love how there's just a compilation of resources that other people have contributed as this appreciative inquiry field is growing.
Yeah, very much. Well, I mean, David Cooperide, I think it was the early 80s, when he completed his dissertation and started sharing his results, and just people. So I think people started to get it.
So people started to get it. Okay, so two more questions. We're going to get into what is actually the newer book on appreciating health and care. So it sounds like there's a lot of case studies in there, 16 case studies.
Yes.
And is it mostly with organizations that are working within healthcare?
The case studies have come all from individuals who are using appreciative inquiry in their work setting, but they're very varied. So, for example, one of the contributors, she used the S.O.A.R model to assess their pre-operating procedures.
Okay.
So that's in there. But then you've also got people who use a S.O.A.R for a team building session, or who used it to assess patient safety.
So I'm just thinking of the naysayers who are just like, we're here to solve problems. We don't have time to do this, like, groovy woo-woo. I'm sure you hear this a lot, or I'm sure the people that are introducing this into their emergency rooms or whatnot, or or rooms where operations are happening, hear a little bit of that. How do you, I mean, not necessarily persuade, but how do you help people get it?
Well, by helping them experience a question, and the response in themselves to a question,
Okay.
or to seeing the benefits of positive conversations. And I would say that there are always cynics, and it never works trying to persuade them.
Right. You can't persuade them.
You can't persuade people who are so wedded. I mean, I did quite a bit of work within homeless hostels, and there'd be someone who, once I'd introduced the idea and the method, and perhaps given them a little activity to warm them up, they'd say, "Oh, I'm going, it's not for me." And for them, for whatever reason, their negativity was really important. So
Yeah.
it's not
It's probably
always,
protective, right? It's a trauma. It's protective from trauma, I'm
it
guessing.
could be, couldn't it? It could be just such an embedded habit that people
Yeah.
wouldn't know who they were without it.
Yeah.
And again, when I worked in community groups as well, sometimes I'd be explicitly invited to use appreciative inquiry, but if I wasn't, then I would just be a more conventional facilitator, depending what people want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that though, like that starting with just one question and noticing a shift, just
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, there's a lovely warm-up activity which is called a sparkling moment, and all it is, you ask people in pairs this is a very first thing, but it really helps set the tone, and
Okay.
share with your partner, your colleague, a moment that's gone really well, something that stands out for you in the last few weeks, days, and then the listener, having heard the story, will say, and in that story I really noticed this strength of yours coming through. So you both get a good story and you start the thinking about strengths. And very often it's easier initially to hear someone else say these are your strengths than to say these are my strengths.
And so the deep listening component that happens in the interview, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where if someone's just doing their own associative thinking when someone else is talking or is just daydreaming or whatnot, might not work so well. Talk a little bit
Mm-hmm.
about that, about the skill and the muscle of deep listening.
Yeah, it's having a real interest in other people, and having a profound sense of value that everyone has,
Mm.
and wanting to find that out. And then so it's possible to have lovely conversations wherever you are, whether it's with somebody on the tills in the shops, or a bus driver, or somebody on a bench, and it's just like really knowing that everybody has that wisdom, and is it possible to bring it out in any conversation.
Mm.
And I've only ever found once people who've really absolutely refused to do appreciative conversation. But in all the years, once people have got into it, sometimes I might say, well, you ask the questions, and if you don't feel comfortable talking about giving your answers, don't. There has to be lots of permission in there
Yeah.
for people to do it or not do it. In the same way, we've got the third tool of appreciative inquiry is called the 5Ds. So that's where you define the topic that you want to look at, whether that could be patient safety, it could be well-being. Actually, I would say that whenever you do an appreciative process, you enhance well-being, but you can actually choose the topic of well-being in your appreciative processes. So you define your topic, and then you do discovery, which is discovering all the good stories, the strengths, the values, what's gone well. And then you do dream. That's like that imagine question, which I shared with you earlier. Imagine it's a year's time and your podcast has gone from strength to strength. What might you be doing? How might you be feeling? And that dream, if you've got the time and the space, make it a creative activity where people get down and do something artistic. It doesn't have to be artistic, but that it's non-linear. you're drawing on that right side of the brain for the dream. Because you're kind of trying to tell a story about the future in the same way that we've been sharing stories about the past. When we're dreaming into possible stories of the future. And then you do design, which is how are we going to help it happen? What would be the next steps, the small things that we can do to bring that dream nearer into reality? And then the last one is called destiny or delivery, where you just, how do we keep this process going? How do we sustain it? But of those
I found it for anyone who's like blown away and wants to see the visual on this or is watching this on video.
Oh, lovely. Yes. Now this comes from another wonderful woman in the NHS called Sonia Sparkles. And she does the most amazing graphics, and she's very generous and lets us share them. But it's her work.
So great. Yeah, you guys, this appreciatingpeople.co.uk. If you go, I'm just going to walk you through how I'm finding all these incredible resources here. So once you're on their website, you're just going to go to resources and downloads, and then you're going to put in your name and your email, and then it's going to open up this page that just has all of these shared resources from all of these people working with AI, which does not stand for artificial intelligence. It stands for appreciative interviews. And that's where all these incredible pictures are coming from that have like those 5 Ds, the discovery, design, dream, destiny. Wait, this is 4 Ds. You said 5, right?
Yeah. So the first one is, so it began as a 4D model, but quite early on they added 5. So it's the first one where you define your topic.
Define your topic. Right. So important. Yeah. Play in an arena. Love that.
Where you might be presented with a problem, and in the definition phase, you're going to find out what's the best way of framing our topic in order to address this problem, but to address it from this perspective.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Is there another one that has all 5 Ds with the define? Because I can see how important.
There's some of our cards. I think we've got stuff on the 5 Ds on our website. We've got a nice card for it.
Okay. And that's part of the AI essential cards?
Yes.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah,
and you guys
in there.
Order these they're available on the cart. And you said you do ship to North
America.
Yes,
we do ship. And some of them are available in e-versions. So there is an e-version of this one. And there's an e-version of the Appreciating Health book.
Oh my gosh. So with the cards, people can just lead exercises with other people, huh? It's like good for leaders. And
yes, I mean, and for us, we use the cards. I actually use the taste cards, which are all sort of pinky purple colors. That's a slightly different pack, but that's my curriculum for a 2-day course, really.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it just means that once you've got
that one. So that's
you've got that pack, the Taste of AI.
Oh, it's the Taste
of AI 2.0 it is. But that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. So I'm showing these on the video. If people are just listening and you want to go back, I'm just sort of showing you through the visual, but just start poking around and shop and in resources. It's sometimes hard. I know I have websites as well that have so many tip sheets and so much information that it's sometimes hard to, you hear something and you're like, I need that. That would help. I would imagine a lot of the people who are listening are wellness pros who lead workshops. And so to have tools like this that can activate collaborative intelligence, and that's really what got me into liberating structures and discovering appreciative interviews as a structure, was it's totally different to be in a room where everyone's in their own head and everyone's in their own individuated consciousness to activating collaborative intelligence. Because at that point, people feel the magic and the Shakti's there, the we space is created. And they're like, oh my gosh, I've had so many breakthroughs, and like they're just uplifted and expanded. You can tell the dopamine's going, the serotonin's going, like you can tell they're just in a completely different neurology. And so when you talked about it being a spiritual practice, I'm like, I'm 1,000% behind you. Like, I find there's no better way for people to connect. I mean, we can connect physically in a practice through a hike or a yoga class or qigong or doing something together physically. And I do see the value of somatic, absolutely. But there's also a huge value of humans structured speaking or talking or having a way of connecting through questioning. And this really unlocks that.
Yes. And, almost giving ourselves challenges. What can I find to appreciate here? Whatever the setting is. And shall I just keep it inside me or shall I share it? All those are ways of just building that strength up, that muscle. I spent quite a long time studying A Course in Miracles, and one day I asked a friend who had he had an e-version of it to count how many times appreciation appeared. And now I've forgotten the number, but it was astonishingly high how often you could get appreciation in a spiritual book.
Wow. Right. Of course. Of course. Right. It's like,
Yeah.
Honor the good. There's so many ways to say it in so many
Yeah.
traditions where you start thinking about it. It's like, well, what are all the different ways that appreciation is expressed in my spiritual lineage or my faith or in my culture or in my community?
Yeah. It's lovely to see that.
I learned in yoga, in Tantra, this phrase, it was see the Shri. And Shri is like the exultant. So you see the Shri in the mundane. Like there's always Shri.
Yeah.
So it's always there.
Yes.
Just see it.
Yeah. Yes. And another word which describes appreciative inquiry really well is that it's relational. It's always about the relationships, and how do we strengthen them? How do we build them up? So one of the metaphors I like to use in training is the regenerative agriculture is focusing on the soil. How do we enhance and improve and support the soil? So I see that in organizations and teams, the culture is like the soil. So instead of putting in inputs or new varieties or whatever, we want to support that soil of our environment. That's, for me, that's the relational space. And appreciative inquiry is constantly feeding that in different ways.
We work so much with microbiome in Club Thrive, which is the other side of what I do.
Oh, yeah.
And I've written books on like cow dung, like cow dung in soil and what's the difference and what feeds and they're both unbelievable. I mean, there's more microbiomes in soil than there's in cow dung, obviously, because cow dung becomes soil. But it is remarkable to think of the interactions that are necessary for life. And life comes from the soil and life comes from the water right. And it's like who we are is so much greater. I love how Dr. Siegel, Danny Siegel talks about it with like we, like you're more of a we than a me. So you're like an MWE, you're a we. And then and what you're saying is like, here is a tool. Here is an essential skill set. Now, one of the last interviews we published on Wellness Pro Academy was on millennial social wellness clubs, because I help at Wellness Pro Academy. I help wellness professionals, whether they're doctors or the most woo-woo energy healers, develop a club structured so that there is a container for culture that's based on habits, it's based on wellness expertise, it's based on convictions. Like you really create a culture around what we know works. And she was really highlighting that, the millennials are so absent the skill set of creating culture, that they're lonely, they're depressed, they're isolated. And this is what happened with our, experiment into digital nativism. Right. So the digital natives, the more digital native someone is, often the more they're struggling with isolation and don't have this muscle of building culture. So what advice, I want to ask you this last question. And we are going to do, so those who like this episode, Suzanne and I are doing another episode where Suzanne is going to ask me a bunch of questions. It's going to be TMI all over the place. And I will be exactly who I am, and honest and vulnerable and all the things. So if you want to see this in action, you can listen for that podcast. So in my last question to you for today, like how would you advise people who are like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. I feel lonely. I feel isolated. Or on my team, there's a lot of millennials or there's a lot of Gen Z who might feel lonely, isolated. And where do we begin?
Well, something that underpins my work is that I trained with Byron Katie. I don't know if you've come across
Yes.
her work.
Before questions.
And so, the fundamental question there is it true?
True.
So if you like, I'm constantly checking in with myself. I don't share the Byron Katie work routinely on training, because it's not asked for, but it is in there in me. So, I'm lonely. Is it true? So we have to start fundamentally questioning in a gentle way, not an aggressive way, some of the beliefs and the constructs that we've kind of bought into.
Yeah. And the labels, right? Of like depressed.
And the labels. Yes. And then because there's one of the theoretical underpinnings of appreciative inquiry is something called social constructionism, which acknowledges that for everybody, our world has been socially and historically constructed, and it varies according to gender, location, age, all sorts, religion.
Yeah,
there's all sorts of messages. I'm really struck by how much, being brought up as a Roman Catholic, how many messages are in there that are telling us we're inherently sinful and we need saving.
oh, right?
We've got a lot to undo.
Yeah.
On those things. So having that thought, is it true, is quite helpful. And then thinking, how can I construct this reality differently? How can I see it differently? What small changes can I make in my construction of reality?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That's so good. And again, it's like the question, is it true? Right? Bam. And that's a reframe. And it just breaks you out of the mental pattern, right? That pattern that's wired in the brain that leads to, more of what you don't want to experience. It's like, no, change that. Like that's on each of us to catch ourselves and to do the reframe and to open it back up and create the culture we want to experience. We're living in a made up world, right? And what you're saying is like, we're making up the soil. We're making up our culture all the time. We're making it up in every moment that we're engaging.
Yes. And there's a nice alignment with Edgar Schein's work, Humble Inquiry.
Yes, I love that book. Yeah. So those who don't know it, Schein, Edward Schein. Yeah. Say more.
And that idea about accessing the power of our ignorance, because we, especially in the West, we're so brought up to be any good, we need to know something. But actually not knowing, coming back to that again, the power of not knowing is really helpful.
And it's so, and I can just see now in you saying that, how it's so connected to building culture, to building families, to intergenerational, to, like intergenerational connectivity, which is so hurting right now. There's so many grandparents who don't get to connect with their grandkids. And there's just so much brokenness, right? And I just love that we're all responsible for creating that together.
Yeah, although it doesn't always feel like that, does it? So that's the delicate balance that to help people realize that in a gentle way.
Oh my gosh, Suzanne, I have so many more questions. This will be continued to talk to you for hours. Again, everyone, I'm going to point you to Suzanne's website, and this is appreciatingpeople.co.uk. And this is a lot of the work that she's done with her husband, Tim Slack, who was the founder of Appreciating People. So much work on your site. You guys, if you are involved in churches, there's Appreciating Church on their website. There's student planners for how to be more awesome that I'm definitely sharing with my kid. And then your training bundle. There's so many free resources, many of which we shared today. But really just like time block, spend some time there. And we'll have Suzanne and maybe even Tim back on the show. Thank you so much. Any closing thoughts, Suzanne?
Well, I've just loved somehow knowing intuitively we could just do a really wide-ranging conversation, lots of things that I wouldn't normally bring in. I've brought in here. So it's been all over the place, but in a good way, I hope, for people.
Oh, so many tools and skills. And I think it really brings people into a world. I think what we just did was bring people into a much bigger world of work that they might not have known about. And now they have a few different entry points, a few different access points to find out, what is the place that they want to take deeper.
Yes, and there's a lovely book called Conversations Worth Having by Jackie Stavros and Cherry Torres, and they've got fantastic resources on their website as well.
Oh, great. So one more that we'll add, and we'll add all these things in the links to the show. Okay, so Suzanne and I will be back, and we'll be doing an appreciative interview, and all about new years that hopefully you guys can use the same questions. We'll put the same questions in the chat, and then you can do them with whoever you want to grow with in 2025.